Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Polygon and what some of our models here at the channel are making of its recent price action. If you like the content and remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. Before I get into MATIC though, I do just want to give a quick shout out and reminder. So if you've seen some of our recent videos, you might be aware that we're actually partnering with Jay from over at Daily Crypto Analysis. Jay has a great channel, I recommend going checking it out. And we're going to be making a website where we're going to be able to host a lot of the model data that we present on this website, along with data that Jay has, in one kind of one-stop shop website. Now, that's going to take a little bit of time for us to get up and running. So in the meantime, we want to have another way of giving you some early access to some UDPI data. So we've kind of melded this with another thing that we've wanted to do for a while. We wanted to get some more specific feedback from the community about our content, you know, what you're liking, what you might like to see more of, things like that. And so, and also what you might like to see on a website, right? We're very curious for your input of what you like to see as we're actually building this website. So what we've done is we put together a brief survey where we just have a few questions about, you know, our content, things that you're enjoying, things that you might want us to do more of, things like that, as well as things that you might like to see on the channel. And then kind of in exchange for filling out that survey, we're going to give folks some early access to UDPI data, specifically the UDPIs for Bitcoin and ETH. So the way that's going to be presented is just kind of this simple Google Doc that we'll share with folks that'll have live UDPI data for Bitcoin and Ethereum hosted on it across all the three different time frames of the UDPI. So if you're interested in getting early access to that, this will be, you know, just free access after you fill out the survey. Go ahead and fill out that survey. I'll leave a link to the survey in the description. All right, so now getting on to MATIC. So MATIC is kind of an interesting asset just because it really performed very well in some very bearish times recently, right? You know, late December was not an especially bullish time for crypto. Bitcoin wasn't doing very well at all, but yet MATIC actually did put in a new all-time high back in December, which is remarkable. You know, only very few assets actually managed to do that. I think Luna might have been one of the only other ones that managed to put in a new all-time high in those very bearish conditions at the end of December. Obviously, there are other assets as well, where Luna is the other prominent one that comes to mind when I think about ones that were able to do well in that period. And in some ways, you know, maybe it makes sense, right? You know, MATIC is probably the leading, I mean, it is the leading layer 2 solution for Ethereum. And, you know, Ethereum, with its gas fees being as high as they are, and with ETH 2.0, or the elements of ETH 2.0 that would actually address high gas fees being well in the future at this point, it seems like solutions like MATIC are definitely necessary, and probably will continue to be necessary even if, you know, ETH 2.0 comes out and is able to lower gas fees to some degree. You know, Ethereum being such a big, massive kind of project, you know, even with some of those upgrades they're going to be putting in, it's likely that there'll need to be additional scaling alongside. And so that's what MATIC is really trying to, or Polygon is really trying to accomplish. And so if we look at our UDPI for MATIC, that's what I'm showing you here, the upside downside potential indicator. I'm showing you the medium term version of the model. So this cares about moves that kind of play over weeks to months. I thought this would be an interesting place to start in this video. And what I'm showing you here is just the price history of MATIC over time, color coded to the UDPI level. And so, you know, MATIC is kind of a remarkable price history that it kind of was just like remarkably flat overall. I mean, obviously with some, you know, volatility, but more or less kind of this sideways accumulation zone before just an absolute explosion to the upside. And then ever since the summer, I've been putting in this kind of very nice channel where we're just putting in higher highs, higher lows, higher highs, higher lows, all the way up to actually through December. But now it's been correcting along with the crypto market. But what you might notice is that I've been putting a lot of work kind of in just this very kind of narrow range in UDPI level, right? You know, it would realize a chunk of its realistic upside potential, then it would have to cool off, correct down, realize some of the downside potential, but then move back up. It's kind of working in a very close range. Now it's starting to exercise a bigger part of that upside versus downside range here, growing down into the green. And I think we can see this a bit more clearly if we just look at the raw output of the model. So this is what it looks like, right? So, you know, there's kind of these two big moves kind of in this big kind of move up here where it went to red, dipped back down below 0, then went back on another big run. And then ever since the summer, we're kind of operating on this range, right? Kind of coming up between really kind of -1 and a little over 1, -1 and 2 more or less, or you could extend it to be -2 to 2. And really, you could argue that we're still in that range on the UDPI, right? We come out of the summer, we've actually seemed to be forming a bottom at around -2 on this medium-term UDPI. And one other thing I think is important to note with this output, just looking at this, is one of the things you want to see to be bullish about an asset, or to think that we might still be in a bull market, is the idea of setting in higher lows, right? So the idea being that coming off of these really high risk levels, when upside potential has really been exhausted, you're going to be realizing a bunch of downside potential as you come down. And then the question is, okay, you realize some amount of downside potential. The next time you really come down and correct heavily again, like what we've just been doing, are you going to realize a similar amount of realistic downside potential? Or are you actually going to find a bottom at a higher point within that realistic downside potential, right? And that seems to be what happened here. That we came all the way down to around -3 in the summer. Now, if we see this as being, if we're looking for a higher low, we might be finding that at -2 right now. Now, obviously, it's a little bit too early to just, crack out the champagne and celebrate. Obviously, there's going to be some work that MATIC needs to do to be convincing that this is an uptrend that can continue and reestablish some upside. And it's probably going to be really dependent on how Bitcoin does, if it can stay healthy, all that kind of, if bullish sentiment can re-enter the market. But if that does happen, this is a bullish structure from a UDPI perspective, right? Because what you don't want to see is the asset going down and realizing more realistic downside potential than the previous really bearish point, right? Because that might suggest we're going to a period where some longer downside is necessary. So, for example, coming into the COVID capitulation, when we took out this low here, that was a sign of some downside that ended up following. And with some of our other assets that have longer histories, this is what you see in bear markets, that when you go down, you'll take out kind of the previous low, go make it a lower low, and then bear market would be setting in lower lows as you go down. Bull markets tend to be setting higher lows as you go. So this is something that I'm watching that's, I think, a good sign, not just for MATIC, but frankly for a number of other crypto assets that have actually been showing similar behavior. Not all of them, but Bitcoin has, for example, Ethereum has, MATIC has. That's definitely a positive sign for them. So we can also look at our other time frames for the UDPI. So we have the long term, cares about moves that play out over multiple months to years, so much more broad macro cycle type risk. And then the short term, which cares about moves that play out over days to weeks, a lot shorter time preference. You'll see the short term updating to kind of intermediate volatility a lot more quickly than something like the long term, which really cares about broader risk, these broader movements. And so on the long term, you can also see that kind of higher low being set in. Maybe not quite as pronounced as on the medium term, but it is there. This is, technically speaking, a higher low that might be forming here. And that's, again, a bullish sign. Now, the short term, that's not happening, but really with the short term, I don't see that as being as diagnostic, just because the short term is really not trying to pick up on things that are especially long-lasting. It's really more in the shorter term time preference. So this I interpret a little bit differently than something like the long-term UDPI. So the fact that on these longer-term timescales we're seeing that potential higher low forming, I think is a good sign in a way. It would have been very much more concerning if we were just breaking all the way back down, because that might be the sign that we'd be starting a new kind of bearish phase, which obviously I don't think many of us are hoping for. That's just my interpretation of the data, though, of course. Obviously, you should make your own decisions. So the final indicator I wanted to look at here is a bit different. This is has quite a different focus than the UDPI. So this is the Trend Confidence Indicator, or TCI. This is one that's relatively new to the channel, or newer to the channel, but I think it gives some really interesting information that's different from the UDPI and is useful in confluence with the UDPI. So the Trend Confidence Indicator is trying to gauge basically how confident should we be in a current trend, and given trend we're in, and then giving key levels for us to watch in terms of whether or not we should be bullish or bearish, essentially. So the way that you can read this is that if you're in a localized uptrend and the TCI flips green and is moving up, that's really bullish. That suggests that you can have faith in that uptrend continuing. Indeed, that's, for example, looking at this one coming out of the March 2020 crash, that's exactly what we saw, all the way up until here, which then we skyrocketed off. And that suggested that that uptrend was likely over, and indeed we just got down/sideways accumulation after that. We can see a similar thing happen here. It flipped green for this move up, but then flipped red as we fell off, and then that led to this downside. But then it flipped green actually before this huge run to the upside, and more or less stayed green. It was just a little blip down here into the red green all the way up through this, suggesting that overall there's more reason to be bullish here than there was to be bearish throughout this whole thing. And then it very quickly identified that this uptrend was over here, at least for now. It stayed red and then comes up and then flips green as we moved into these higher peaks up here. So, flipping green into this move here, red temporarily, then flipping green as we shot back up. So we can see is that recently it's been kind of oscillating between red and green a little bit from this move kind of coming out of the summer up through here in the fall into the latter part of this past year. We put in the all-time high. What we can see is that it was getting kind of increasingly concerned about that uptrend, right? It's getting increasingly less confident in the uptrend, as you can see with lower values here in the green than previously, meaning that I was starting to get a little bit worried as we got there. It was still flipping green, saying, yes, this is an uptrend that will go somewhere, but then it quickly would come back down. And then what ended up happening is after we put in the all-time high, it very quickly flipped bearish, pretty much right at New Year's. You can see it flipping bearish, and it pretty much has stayed bearish ever since. It's just a very brief blip above zero, but then below ever since. And I should mention, zero is really that cutoff line. That's the place where this is that dividing line between bullishness and bearishness. Above is bullish, below is bearish. And so it's really just identifying this whole time is not a great time to be getting into MATIC potentially, just that, this was a downtrend and it didn't seem to be showing any signs of breaking. Now, interestingly, the current exact value, one of the nice things about this, so the TCI is a machine learning based algorithm, but one of the nice things of it is that you can kind of probe it to get it to tell you what price level it's really watching as being that key dividing line between bullishness and bearishness. And right now it's watching $1.65-ish, roundabout. And interestingly, this is right around the price we're actually trading at right now. The price, depending on when you're watching this, is probably going to be a bit different than when I recorded it. Here it was just slightly below, but it's right on that dividing line. Now, I do want to just say that you have to take this value with a slight grain of salt in the sense that, this is a continuous output here, so higher values are more confidence, basically. So if you're sitting right at zero, that's basically just indecision. So even if we were slightly above this level, I wouldn't be getting, super excited and say that, oh, that means an uptrend has to happen. Because no, being right at zero is not very diagnostic. Really, if you're starting to get well above zero or starting moving more convincingly up above zero, that's when you start getting a little bit more hopeful that this is an uptrend that could continue. And so really, this is the key level that I'm watching, but I'd like to see MATIC, put in a convincing move above this to say, okay, maybe now we've broken out of this kind of oppressive downtrend we've been in ever since December of last year. Maybe we can now start moving to the upside. And then what you might look for is kind of setting in higher highs, higher lows as we might be moving past that. But certainly the fact that we're coming back up and kind of retesting zero on this metric is good. Because, down through this point, we were nowhere close to zero. This was kind of hopeless. But then we've been slowly kind of moving back up. That kind of bullishness has been kind of getting more and more within reach. And now we're almost there, potentially. And so that's what I'm going to be watching. Can we decisively break above this level? If so, I think that could be good news for MATIC. Maybe that suggests at least a localized uptrend, even if it's not one that can take us all the way back to all-time highs. So those are things I'm going to be watching. So from the UDPI's perspective, just interpreting it in terms of this current level of risk, it thinks that we have more upside than downside potential across every single time frame. So I think if the rest of the market can remain bullish, see no reason why we can't realize that. And I think there's some confluence in the fact that the TCI is getting ready to flip bullish if MATIC shows that it's able to really break above this key level. So I think if that happens, and if Bitcoin especially is able to break above its kind of resistance zone it's been sitting at around 45K, I would expect MATIC to be able to rally from there. Now, obviously not financial advice, should make your own decisions, but that's just my reading of this data. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with UDPI, we're all going to make it.